I never planned to see them again. 15 years was enough time to erase their faces from my memory, or at least that's what I kept telling myself. But when the letter arrived last week, neatly folded with my full name handwritten across it, I knew exactly whose handwriting that was. My mother's. For a moment, I just stared at it. My hands froze, my chest tightened, and 1,000 emotions clawed their way back. The humiliation, the silence, the years of pretending I didn't exist. After all these years, now they remember me? I tossed the envelope aside and tried to focus on my work. But the truth is, you can't ignore the ghosts you've been running from. They always find a way back. I wasn't always this calm, confident woman sitting in a Lakeview villa. Back then, I was the disappointment, the forgotten daughter in a family obsessed with reputation. My brother Adrian was the golden child, the pride of my parents. And me? I was the shadow behind his spotlight. When I got a scholarship to an art school, my parents laughed. "Art doesn't feed you," my father had said. "You're wasting your time." But I went anyway, and that was the beginning of my exile. The years that followed were a slow kind of punishment. Phone calls unanswered, invitations lost, family gatherings that somehow never reached me. And then one day, my mother said the words that broke me completely. "Maybe it's better if you just stay away." So I did, for 15 years. But fate has a strange sense of humor, because the same people who once erased me now wanted to visit my home. The letter wasn't an apology, not even close. It was an invitation request, written in that familiar, delicate handwriting. "We'd love to see you, darling. The family wants to reconnect. Adrian has some business matters he'd like to discuss. We'll be in your city next weekend." I could almost hear her voice through the words, sweet, polite, pretending nothing ever happened. They weren't coming to see me. They were coming because they needed something. And that, right there, was my first mistake, thinking I could handle this without emotion. That night, I walked through the long glass hallway of my house, the one overlooking the lake, and every reflection of myself reminded me how far I'd come. The girl they once mocked for chasing dreams was now running a design firm with her name on every magazine cover. The house I built stood on land they'd once said I could never afford. Everything they denied me, I had created on my own, and now they wanted to walk back into it, as if nothing ever happened. I should have ignored that letter. I should have thrown it into the fire. But I didn't, because sometimes silence isn't peace. Sometimes it's the perfect weapon. When the day finally came, the air felt heavier than usual. I remember checking the clock, 2:47 p.m., the exact time their black SUV pulled up the driveway. My heart didn't race. My palms didn't sweat. I felt nothing, and that scared me more than anger ever could. Through the tall glass doors, I saw them stepping out, my parents still carrying that expensive arrogance, and Adrian, smiling like he was still the hero of the family. They didn't look guilty. They looked expectant, like they were doing me a favor by showing up. My mother's voice echoed through the entryway as I opened the door. "Maya, you look so different, dear different." Yes, that's what happens when you're left to rebuild yourself from ashes. I didn't hug them. I didn't invite them in right away. I simply smiled, polite, detached, and perfectly calm. "It's been a long time," I said. "I almost forgot what your voices sounded like." They exchanged awkward smiles, pretending everything was normal, but I could already sense it, the tension behind the small talk, the unease in my father's tone. Adrian was the first to speak. "Maya, listen, I'm glad you agreed to meet. There's something we need to talk about." There it was, the real reason. The family reunion wasn't about forgiveness. It was about business, about money. And as I watched their faces carefully rehearse their emotions, I realized they had no idea who I'd become. They thought the old Maya would still be there, waiting for approval, desperate for love. But that Maya was gone. And what they were about to walk into was a lesson 15 years in the making. They came looking for help, but they had no idea what I had prepared for them. They say time heals everything. That's a lie people tell themselves so they can sleep at night. Time doesn't heal. It simply teaches you how to hide the scars better. As my parents and Adrian sat in my living room that afternoon, every polite word they spoke felt like a knife quietly twisting open an old wound. They looked around, admiring the art, the view, the success they once said I'd never have. And while they smiled, my mind drifted 15 years back to the day I stopped being their daughter. 15 years ago, it was my brother's graduation dinner. The house was full of people, laughter, cameras flashing. He was the star, I was the background noise. I remember showing my father a small art portfolio I'd been working on. It was a series of sketches, portraits of our family, each one drawn with love. He barely looked at them before saying, "Pretty drawings won't pay your rent, Maya. Stop wasting time." Adrian laughed, a little too loudly. She thinks she's going to be famous one day. Cute everyone laughed with him. I forced a smile, swallowed my pride, and promised myself that night, one day they'll look at me differently, but one day never came. When I left for art school, they stopped calling. Birthdays passed, holidays too. Every reunion photo I saw online, every smiling family post, reminded me of the seat at the table that was no longer mine. Then came the wedding I wasn't invited to, Adrian's big day, my own brother, and I found out about it from a classmate's Instagram story. I didn't cry that day, I painted. A dark canvas, black, gray, and a single red line cutting through the middle. I called it The Divide. That painting sold 2 years later for more money than my father had ever given me in my life, and that was the first moment I realized, maybe distance was the best gift they ever gave me. Back in the present, Adrian's voice pulled me out of the memory. "Maya, about the new property. Dad thinks you could help us. You're good with investments, right?" There it was, straight to business, not even 5 minutes of fake affection before asking for something. I leaned back on the couch, studying them quietly. My mother avoided my eyes. My father crossed his arms, defensive already. "What kind of help?" I asked. "Just a small thing," Adrian said quickly. "A partnership deal. You know, since you have the capital and contacts, we could all benefit, like old times, old times." The irony almost made me laugh. As they spoke, I looked at the family portrait hanging behind them, one I'd painted years ago. 3 smiling faces, no me. They didn't even realize it was missing a 4th figure. That's how invisible I'd been. "So let me get this straight," I finally said. "You all ignored me for 15 years, and now you're here because you want me to invest in your project?" My father cleared his throat. "It's not like that, Maya. We just thought, you thought I'd forgotten." My tone was calm, almost gentle. But some things don't fade that easily. Silence, the kind that fills a room like fog, thick, suffocating, heavy. Then my mother whispered, "We just want to make things right." I wanted to believe her, but the timing was too convenient. Their company had been struggling. Rumors spread fast in business circles. I'd read about it in the papers last month. They were desperate, and desperation makes people remember what they once threw away. After they left that evening, I stood at the window watching their car disappear down the road. For the first time in years, the ache didn't feel like weakness. It felt like clarity. They wanted help? They'd get it. Just not the kind they expected. Because this time, I wasn't the forgotten daughter trying to fit in. This time, I was the woman they'd underestimated. And I finally had the power to decide what family really meant. Before I could teach them their lesson, I needed to remind myself of everything they'd taken from me. After they left my house that evening, I stood in the silence they'd forgotten how to fill. It was strange, how familiar voices could sound so foreign. For years, I'd imagined what I'd say if I ever saw them again. Angry speeches, bitter words, maybe even tears. But when the moment finally came, I didn't need any of that. The silence spoke louder than revenge ever could. That night, I sat at my desk with an old sketchbook, the one I carried through my worst years. Each page held pieces of who I was before they broke me. And somewhere between those faded pencil marks, I found the part of me that had survived. 15 years ago, I was painting in a cramped apartment with flickering lights and neighbors yelling through paper-thin walls. I worked 2 jobs, slept 4 hours a night, and painted until my fingers ached. Some days I didn't even sell a single piece. But I never stopped, because I knew. One day, the silence they left me in would turn into my voice. It was a winter morning in New York. Cold, brutal. I'd just been rejected by a major art gallery. Again. I was sitting in a cafe, staring at my half-empty cup, wondering if my parents had been right all along. Maybe art was a waste of time. Then a woman at the next table leaned over. She was older, elegant, wearing a coat that probably cost more than my rent. "You made those sketches?" she asked, pointing at my notebook. I nodded, embarrassed. She smiled. "You have something rare, dear. Don't let rejection make you ordinary." That woman turned out to be a gallery owner, and 2 months later, my first exhibition sold out. It didn't make me rich overnight, but it gave me something far more valuable: validation. From there, everything shifted. Each painting told a story, my story, and people connected to it. They saw strength where I'd only seen pain. I started a studio, then a design brand, then an entire company, one that grew faster than I could have imagined. And while they built walls to keep me out, I built an empire on the outside. Back in the present, I looked around my house. Every piece of art, every photo, every inch of the space was a reminder. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had built something bigger than their world could ever hold. But still, some part of me wanted closure, not just success, because success without justice feels unfinished. So I started to dig. Old business articles, property records, company filings. It didn't take long to find what I suspected. Adrian's company, their family pride, was drowning in debt. They weren't just desperate for my help, they were on the edge of losing everything. And I knew right then I wasn't going to humiliate them. I was going to mirror them. I would offer them exactly what they'd once denied me: a chance. Except this time, it would come with a price they'd never see coming. The plan started simple. I called Adrian 2 days later. "I've been thinking about your offer," I said. "Maybe we can meet again and discuss terms." His tone brightened immediately. "That's great, Maya. I knew you'd come around. Dinner tomorrow?" I smiled to myself. Tomorrow sounds perfect. The same confidence they once mocked would now be their undoing. When I hung up, I walked out to the balcony. The lake shimmered under the setting sun. Calm, almost too calm, the same stillness before a storm. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one being invited into their world. This time, they were stepping into mine. And they had no idea that every word, every smile, every business proposal would lead them closer to the lesson they'd been avoiding their entire lives. They thought I was helping them rebuild their empire. But what I was really building was the trap. The restaurant Adrian chose was one of those expensive places that pretends dim lighting equals sophistication. Every table glowed with candlelight, every waiter spoke in whispers, and every laugh sounded rehearsed. I arrived 10 minutes late, on purpose. Let them wait. When I walked in, I saw them instantly. My parents sitting upright, Adrian waving like we were old friends. 3 faces from another lifetime. As I approached, my mother stood halfway, smiling that same careful smile. "Maya, you look stunning." "Success suits you," my father added. I smiled back, perfectly polite. "Thank you. It's been a while." The waiter poured wine. I watched them struggle for small talk. They asked about my work, my travels, my home. All the things they once said were worthless dreams. "We're really proud of what you've achieved," my mother said. "You've built something incredible." It sounded sweet, but her eyes flickered each time she mentioned money. She wasn't proud. She was curious. I leaned in slightly. "Thank you, Mom. I couldn't have done it without your motivation." She blinked, not sure whether it was gratitude or sarcasm. Then Adrian got to the point. "So Maya, about the project I mentioned, we're developing a new estate. The banks pulled out last minute, and we just need a short-term partner to stabilize things." He slid a folder across the table. It was thick. Contracts, projections, numbers. I didn't touch it. "And you came to me because you're family," he said quickly. "We trust you." Trust. The word tasted bitter. It wasn't trust, it was convenience. "I'll look into it," I said finally. "Send the documents to my office." He grinned, relieved. "I knew we could count on you." My father nodded approvingly. This could be the start of a new chapter for all of us. I raised my glass. Maybe it could. We clinked glasses, but in my head it wasn't a toast. It was the sound of the first domino falling. That night, when I returned home, I placed their file on my desk and opened it. Within minutes, I saw the cracks. The numbers didn't add up. False valuations, missing assets, inconsistent reports. They weren't just struggling, they were hiding something. I smiled. Perfect. They had spent years pretending I didn't exist. Now they were the ones pretending nothing was wrong. The next day, I called Adrian. "I've reviewed your documents," I said. "Let's have a meeting with my financial team. If the numbers hold, we can move forward." He hesitated, then agreed. "Sure, whatever works for you." What he didn't know was that there was no financial team. There was only me and my plan. 2 days later, the meeting took place at my office, a high rise with glass walls overlooking the city. When they walked in, I noticed how small they looked against the skyline. My assistant offered coffee. They refused. Nervous people rarely drink anything before a storm. I kept my tone professional. "Before I commit, I need full access to your financial data." "Transparency is non-negotiable." Adrian forced a laugh. "Of course. We have nothing to hide." "Good," I said, "because hiding things tends to make partnerships complicated." My father frowned slightly in the first crack in his composure. I continued. "You'll get my decision in 3 days. Until then, I'll have my team audit the documents." They agreed, though uneasily, and left soon after. As soon as the door closed, I picked up my phone and made a different call. Not to a financial analyst, but to an investigative journalist I knew. "Remember that story you were chasing about corporate fraud?" I asked. "I think I just found your headline." Over the next few days, I pieced together the puzzle. Adrian's company wasn't just broke. It was built on manipulated contracts and unpaid workers. And the estate project they wanted me to fund? It didn't exist. It was a shell company designed to funnel money into covering their losses. They hadn't come to reconnect. They'd come to use me. For a moment, anger burned through me. Then it cooled into something sharper. They still thought I was naive, that same little girl who begged to be part of their world. But I wasn't that girl anymore. Now I was the woman who could decide exactly how their story ended. When Adrian called again, his voice sounded lighter, desperate to hear good news. "So Maya, did your team finish the review?" "They did," I said calmly, "and I think we can move forward. But first, I'd like to invite you all to my house again. There's something important I want to discuss, in person." He paused. "Oh? Sure, tomorrow?" "Tomorrow evening," I replied. "Don't be late." As I ended the call, I looked out at the lake through my window. The surface was still, calm enough to mirror the sky. But beneath that calm, the current was waiting, because what they didn't know was that the next meeting wouldn't be about business. It would be about consequences. They thought they were walking into a deal. Instead, they were walking straight into the truth. The next evening, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that comes before something breaks. I had everything prepared. The living room table was set with wine, papers, and a single recording device hidden under a stack of folders. Not because I needed proof, but because I wanted them to hear themselves later, unfiltered and raw. At exactly 7 p.m., the sound of engines echoed through the driveway. 3 familiar silhouettes appeared at the door. Adrian entered first, smiling like we were partners about to sign history together. My parents followed, dressed as if they were attending a celebration, not their own downfall. "Maya," my mother began, "you didn't have to go through all this trouble. This house of yours, it's breathtaking." "It's built on honesty," I said softly, "something I take very seriously these days." She smiled awkwardly, not catching the edge in my voice. We sat down. I poured the wine, the same brand they used to keep locked in my father's cabinet when I was a child. He always said I wasn't old enough for it. Tonight I poured it anyway. "So," Adrian said, pretending to be casual, "you mentioned an update about the partnership?" "Yes," I said, sliding a folder across the table. "You'll want to read this carefully." He opened it, expecting contracts. Instead, he found printed articles, copies of documents, emails, and financial statements, all with red circles and highlighted notes. His smile faded. What is this?" "Evidence," I replied, "of the shell companies, the forged contracts, and the unpaid workers you use to inflate your numbers. I'm sure you recognize them. My father's face turned pale. Where did you get this? Public record, I said simply. You'd be surprised how easy it is to uncover the truth when you stop pretending it doesn't exist. Adrian slammed the folder shut. This isn't what you think. I was going to fix it. No, Adrian. You were going to bury it, just like you buried me. He opened his mouth to argue, but I kept speaking, calm, clear, unshakable. You erased me for 15 years because I didn't fit into your perfect little family. But now that your empire is crumbling, suddenly I'm useful again. Do you have any idea how that feels? My mother whispered, We just wanted to make things right. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not regret, but fear. Not fear of losing me. Fear of losing everything else. You had 15 years to make things right, I said quietly. And not once did you try. I stood and walked to the large window overlooking the lake. The reflection of the room behind me looked like a painting, 3 figures sitting in guilt and silence. It was almost beautiful. I could have exposed you already, I said, turning back toward them. But I didn't. Not yet, Adrian's voice trembled. What do you want from us, Maya? Nothing, I said simply. That's the point. He blinked, confused. You're not pressing charges? No, I smiled. I'm giving you exactly what you gave me. Silence. I'm just not sure you'll survive it as well as I did. My father stood, angry now. You think this is justice? You think this is revenge? No, I said. This is consequence. You taught me what it feels like to be alone. Now you get to learn the same lesson. Together, I walked over to the side table and picked up another envelope, the same kind my mother had sent weeks ago. I placed it in front of her. Inside are copies of everything I found. You'll notice there's no signature, no blackmail, no threats, just the truth. I've already sent the same file anonymously to a journalist, Adrian froze. You didn't. I did, I said softly. By tomorrow morning, the world will know what kind of family business you've been running. The silence that followed was the kind that stretches seconds into eternity. No one moved, no one spoke. Finally, my mother whispered, Maya, please. You'll destroy us. You destroyed me first, I said. I walked them to the door, calmly, almost kindly. No shouting, no chaos, just 3 people who finally understood what being powerless felt like. As they stepped out, I said quietly, Take care of each other. You'll need to. The door closed behind them with a soft click, the kind of sound that feels permanent. I stood there for a long time, listening to the echo fade into silence, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The story didn't end there, because revenge may end the pain, but forgiveness decides what comes next. The next morning, the world woke up to their truth. Headlines, articles, numbers that didn't lie anymore. I didn't need to read them. The calls that flooded my phone told me everything. Adrian's company was under investigation. My father had resigned from the board. My mother, she hadn't left the house since. For years, they made me invisible. And now the world could finally see who they truly were. But I didn't feel happy. Not exactly. Revenge doesn't taste like victory. It tastes like silence. A silence that hums inside you long after the noise has stopped. That night, I walked down to the lake. The same lake that had reflected my loneliness for years. The water was still, catching the faint glow of the moon. I watched my reflection. Older now, steadier, softer somehow. For a moment, I imagined a younger version of myself standing beside me, the girl who once begged her family to see her worth. I wanted to tell her she'd made it, that she'd survived every cold shoulder, every rejection, every lie, that she'd built a world so beautiful, even the ones who broke her couldn't look away. But I also wanted to tell her this, that revenge isn't freedom. It's just the echo of pain, replayed until you decide to stop listening. A week later, I received a letter, handwritten again. Same neat cursive, same name on the envelope. This time, it was an apology. No excuses, no justifications, just 6 words. "We're sorry. We should have chosen love." I read it once, then folded it gently and placed it inside my old sketchbook, between the pages that still carried my earliest pain. Not as a memory of what they did, but as a reminder of who I became because of it. These days, when people ask about my story, I don't talk about the betrayal or the revenge. I talk about rebuilding, about how silence can destroy you or teach you to listen differently, because sometimes the loudest justice isn't revenge, it's peace. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat on the balcony, watching the sunrise burn away the night. The phone kept buzzing, messages, news, interviews, offers. I ignored them all. Some stories don't need to be told again, they just need to be understood. I took a deep breath and whispered to the quiet morning, "It's over." But the truth is, it wasn't really an ending. It was just a beginning without their shadows. Turning their rejection into silence was never revenge. It was peace. And peace built on your own strength is the loudest success you'll ever have. If you've ever rebuilt yourself after being ignored or underestimated by your family, hit that like button and share your story below, because your voice deserves to be heard.